Okay, so this is going to be a brief lesson on fearing clauses in the subjunctive. You will see that the subjunctive, or that fearing clauses, there are a variety of ways of expressing a type of fearing clause. But when you have a full subordinate clause after it, you're going to be using the subjunctive. Okay, so the first thing, just to sort of review, is what are some words or some verbs that indicate fearing? And it doesn't always just have to be a verb. Temeo, metuo, and the deponent verb wereor all mean fear, like to fear, to stand in awe, feel reverence, to fear, to dread, to be afraid, any of those. Extemesco is to be greatly afraid or to dread. Pertemesco, basically the same thing. Per usually means thoroughly when it's attached to a verb, thoroughly afraid. Solicitus est, so an adjective plus the verb to be here, to be anxious that there is danger that you certainly could have something like timidus est, he is afraid that, or teriti, I'll make it plural, sunt, they are afraid that. So any of those will express an idea. And these, by the way, are going to be your main clause when we actually get to the subjunctive sentences. So I'm afraid, as it stands, can stand alone and be its own sentence. It will be what follows that goes into the subjunctive, not the actual word or verb or expression that means fear. All right, so some simple statements of fear. You've seen a couple of these before. The first one uses an infinitive, and we've seen these before with temeo. An infinitive can be used where there's where one is stating an actual fact. They were, so we've got temeo, temebant, they were afraid. Entrara, and even in English we tend to follow that with an idea of an infinitive. They were afraid to enter the forest. Fear of what might happen can be expressed in a sentence if there is no subordinate verb clause without using the subjunctive. So if we're just kind of looking at nouns after that, like I fear heights or something like that, you don't need a subjunctive verb because there's no verb clause there. So our example here is Caesar consensum Gallorum temuit. Caesar feared the gathering or the union of the Gauls. All right, so here temeo is just taking a direct object. He's afraid of the union. There's no verb in this sort of idea of what he is afraid of. All right, so in those cases, we don't actually need to worry about the subjunctive. But what happens when we have a broader idea with a subordinate verb? So here we have subjunctive fearing clauses. When we're looking at the first part here, subjunctive fear clauses express fear of an anticipated situation that might happen or has happened. So I could be afraid right now that something has happened, but I'm not sure that it actually has or not. And they're followed by a subjunctive clause. The subjunctive clause is introduced by ut or ne. So where else have we seen ut and ne? We've seen ut and ne in purpose clauses. We've seen ut in result clauses, but the corresponding negative is ut known. So ut might also go with result clauses, just not the ne. This type of construction gives the insight to the speaker's attitude towards the anticipated condition. So something that may happen or has already happened that they're not positive about. So our first sentence here is temeo, I'm afraid, ne caidat. I am afraid that he may, or that he will fall. I kind of like the may or the might and that even in that case, because that keeps that subjunctive idea sort of alive in that. I fear that he may fall. That is, I hope he does not fall, and I will explain more of that later. Another example might be same sentence, but with ut. I am afraid that he may not fall, that he might not fall. Will not, might not. Again, that might and may kind of keep that alive for the subjunctive idea. That is, I hope that he does not fall, or I hope that he does fall. All right, so that seems a little, what you may have noticed there when I translated those and the way I had to give you a that is, I hope he does not fall, and that is, I hope he does fall. You may have noticed that in these two sentences, the word you would express as that, like as in a purpose clause, so that not with the nay, you'll see that these are reversed. So you'll see that ut and nay are reversed. Ut is going to be that not, and they don't have to be side by side, and nay is going to be that. All right, so that seems a little bit different to us, and it is because the Romans actually had a different thought process in what a fearing statement meant. So that's the trickiest part of these clauses. Other than that, they're easy to translate. Thinking of fear as what we might say is an indirect wish may help you remember the reversal of these two introductory words. So ut is really saying, I hope that it will happen, which is the opposite of fearing that it happens. In fact, you're fearing that it might not happen. So ut is used for this. I fear that it might not, because you're hoping for the opposite. Same thing with nay. I hope that it will not happen, or it might not happen. So nay, so hoping that it will not happen is fearing that it actually may happen. So nay gives you this idea of fearing that something will happen. So in English, it's a little bit different. We think, still in terms of positive and negative about what may happen or not happen within the fearing clause. In Latin, the Romans really focused on the positive and negative concept of what one wishes to happen. And also, if you think in terms of wish, you're always thinking subjunctive anyway. Those like wishes contrary to fact, optative subjunctives, those kind of things. Okay, so thus your speaker fears what may happen, and that's introduced by nay, and your speaker and the subject fears what may not happen, and that's ut. So that is actually why they're reversed. All that said, if you can just remember, once you're dealing with subjunctives, that ut and nay are reversed, it might just help. This is a statement I give people to help them out with it. I fear that ut and nay are backwards. And that brings in the idea of the fear clause, which means that ut, if they're backwards, ut means that not, and nay means that. So really, if you get that part of it down, that's all the real new information you need to know about fearing clauses, is that if you see ut, it's that not, and if you see nay, it's that. Um, so I have a double slide here. Mea culpa. So looking at some sample sentences here, keep in mind, right at the top, I'm writing it, ut means that, not, and ne means that. So our first sentence, Mercator timuit ne navis in mari mercisset. Right, and you should be able to start recognizing these tenses of the subjunctive pretty steadily now. This isset is going to be a pluperfect subjunctive. So I want to, in your translation, you want to think in terms of had. So the mercator, the merchant, feared. Ne is that, the ship or his ship. Mergo means like immerse, means to sink. Had sunk in the sea. And there's that irregular ablative singular of mara. Second sentence. Saipe metue bas ut tum opus optimum esset. So here's my subjunctive. It looks like a third or second principal part plus endings. Again, you should be on top of some of these subjunctive endings, imperfect this time. So you want the idea of a was, were, probably were. You could have that ed or did type of form with it. So saipe, often, you were afraid or you were fearing. Ut is that not. That, tuum opus, your work, was not the best. So you were often fearing that it was not, so you were hoping that it was. And that's why we have that ut there. And was is fine here. Session number 3. Haec mulier temet ne. So we're going to have just that. Filia parva in periculum era verit. So fearing clauses tend to generate a lot of perfect subjunctives compared to other, it doesn't outweigh the other ones, but compared to other subordinate clauses, you'll see more perfect subjunctives in fearing clauses, because I could be afraid right now that something has already happened. So this woman is afraid or fears that her little daughter, her parvophilia, era verit, has wandered in periculum, into danger. So I've got that, and then I've got the perfect subjunctive with the has. So I conveyed some idea of that perfect idea, not pluperfect, not imperfect, but has. So, and she's afraid right now that this has happened. A couple more sample sentences. Centurione semper metuant ut valam castoram validum sit. So we've got another word for metuo. We've used it a couple times here for fear. Centurions or guards, you can just call them centurions. Ut, that's going to be, as we know, the that not, we're reversing it. A wallum is a wall or the fortification. Castra comp, validum is strong. And here we've got a present subjunctive of sum. So there was those couple of present subjunctives, eo, sum, simsisit, and eame aseat that I told you needed to make sure you had down. All right, so let's see what we've got. The centurions always are afraid that the wall of the camp or the fortification of the camp is not, we need to get the not in there. We've got an ut, strong. The centurions always fear that the wall of the camp is not strong. And our final sample sentence on these, senex multos annos, start getting some other case uses in here, temebat, ne, so we're just going to have that, milites aurum invenerent. So that's the second principal part plus endings. We've got an imperfect subjunctive. So what we end up with here is multos annos, that's an accusative, and I've got a time designation. Remember, this accusative duration of time. So the old man, for many years, was fearing or was afraid that the soldiers, and when he was find or discover, would discover, and that conveys that idea of imperfect there with would, his gold. All right, so he was protecting that from the soldiers, apparently. All right, so that's, again, once you get past this part, ut and ne being backwards, you're going to be able to translate the sentences similarly as I've been telling you, paying attention to the tense of the subjunctive and just following it from there. All right, so our last slide here deals with a couple of sort of special notes on these. You're not going to have to deal with this much, but just to be aware, sometimes you'll see a subjunctive clause, a fearing clause that has ut or has ne and then known in the place of ut. So these two kind of cancel each other out. It's sort of like a double negative. So you might get something like metuo ne hodie grammaticus non me audiat. So normally, if I didn't have the known there, you would be saying something, I fear that today the grammar teacher hears me. But this almost sort of makes sense. Again, if you can remember that ut and ne are backwards. I fear that the teacher may not hear me today, because that's at that. So it's really canceling out the wish or a double negative to count out that wish idea. I wish for him to hear me. And then our final additional note here is about the verb wereor. Wereor, the deponent verb meaning to fear. It's just like timeo or metuo. A lot of times you will see it in a sentence as its past participle, which is not translated past. It's more a perfect active participle. And I've hinted around at this, that deponents have these things where you have something like having feared, because you can have it active since it's deponent. And you could only have this perfect active participle with a deponent. With the literal meaning having feared, it has the active sense since it's a deponent. This, in fact, can be translated or sort of rephrased in the present as fearing, and just having feared, and then continue this clause with one of the constructions with the ablative, as we talked about, or with it clause of the subjunctive, as we've been talking about earlier. So this allows for me to have longer sentence. I can have a participial phrase of fear before the rest of the sentence. So how does that look? Veritus, so this, I'm treating this as a participle, just ing here. Ne is still going to be that. We've got the passive of capio, captured. So fearing that he would be captured, this is an imperfect subjunctive, fearing that he was being captured. Hannibal venenum bibit. Bibo is drink, and this looks like venom, it is poison. So fearing that he was being captured or fearing that he would be captured, Hannibal drank poison. So that my whole sort of subjunctive and fear clause becomes a participial phrase describing Hannibal. So that can happen. Again, those are not the common ways you're going to see these. You're mostly going to see them just sort of in a straight little sentence, kind of direct, but you've got some sort of fear. And then the thing to always remember, once you realize you've got one of those verbs of fear or phrases of fearing, ut equals that, not, and ne equals that. And if you can remember that part of it and associate that with a verb of fear, you have these down and it won't be a problem. Okay, so that gives us fearing clauses. If you have any questions, please contact me. Walete.